Chapter 1. Cracks in the Golden Couple. Jim and Linda, the golden couple everyone admired, had met at a raucous college party. Their eyes had locked across a room pulsing with music and laughter, and that night they had fallen hard and fast, the kind of love that poets wax lyrical about. Over the years, their bond had become a fortress, unshaken by life's battering storms. But even the mightiest fortresses can crumble. Their spark, once a roaring blaze, had dimmed to a flicker. The daily grind, work pressures, and the numbing monotony of routine gnawed at the foundations of their marriage. Linda, restless and seeking the thrill that once came so effortlessly, found herself captivated by the flirtations of a younger man named Mark, a dangerous game but one she couldn't resist playing. Jim sat in the living room, lost in memories. He remembered their early days' laughter that echoed like music and dreams that soared high. Now those memories felt like they belonged to another life. He watched Linda, dressed to kill, getting ready for another night out. She looked stunning, a stark contrast to their increasingly casual and distant interactions at home. "Don't give me that look, Jim," Linda said, slipping on her heels. Women in their 40s often seek younger companionship. Jim, leaning back and swirling his drink, responded with a cold smile. "And often end up divorced." Linda's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and arrogance. "You want to divorce me," she said with unnerving certainty. "You love me and I love you. This is just a diversion. You wouldn't throw away our commitment over something so small." Jim's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Oh, how modern of you," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You are right, it's practically a trend. Even Audrey Bennett, Mrs. Picture Perfect herself, has a lover. Isn't it just darling how everyone pretends their marriages are fine while screwing around behind closed doors?" Linda's expression hardened, but she said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, fraught with unspoken words that hung in the air. Jim took a long sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "Go on then, Linda. Enjoy your night out. Just remember, every diversion has its price." When the doorbell rang, Linda shot a glance at Jim. "Can you get that?" she asked, though she knew the answer already. Jim didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Nope," he replied flatly, as if she had just asked him to walk across hot coals. "I am not welcoming your boyfriend." With a sigh, Linda opened the door to Mark, her 32-year-old date waiting patiently on the porch. "Sorry about that," she said, gesturing towards the living room where Jim remained entrenched. "He's having a hard time with this whole thing." Mark gave her a reassuring smile, the kind that seemed to say, "No worries, I've seen worse." He was calm, understanding part of what drew her to him. Back inside, Linda tried to calm the storm brewing in Jim. "Mark is not my boyfriend," she said, planting herself firmly in front of him. "Yet. And let's not forget we have been together 20 years. I've been loyal, supportive. I deserve a little freedom." Jim glared at her, feeling the sting of disrespect. "Yeah, freedom to do what? Date some guy you met at Starbucks?" Linda nodded unabashedly. She had met Mark at the Starbucks in her office building, where his flirty banter made her feel young and alive. All her friends were having affairs with younger men, so why not her? That night was just another step in that direction. Mark pulled up in a sleek, late-model Mercedes, the kind that screamed, "I've made it." At the restaurant, he tipped the valet like it was pocket change and ushered Linda inside with an air of easy confidence. "I am delighted you agreed to go out with me, Linda." "You are an incredibly beautiful woman," Mark said. She smiled, appreciating the compliment but feeling the need to set boundaries. "Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your attention, but I love my husband. I'm not leaving him." Mark nodded, unperturbed. "All I wanted was an evening out with a beautiful, intelligent woman, and here we are." The evening flowed smoothly, their earlier coffee chats having laid the groundwork. After a delightful dinner, they hit a jazz club, swaying to the music. Mark grew bolder, his hand resting on her thigh. She didn't mind, in fact, it was thrilling. Around midnight, they finally left the club. In the car, they kissed a passionate, heated exchange that left Linda breathless, but she pulled back. "I should get home. When can I see you again? Mark asked, his eyes glinting with anticipation. I can meet you every day. Maybe Sunday. Do you like the ballet? My cousin can get us good tickets. I've never been, but I'd love to go. David isn't into artsy stuff. I'll meet you instead of picking you up at home. What time? It's a matinee. Let's meet for lunch at 11. They settled the details and drove back to Linda S.'s house. She kissed Mark goodbye, steeling herself for whatever awaited inside. To her surprise, Jim was already in bed, asleep. In the bathroom, she wiped away her makeup, pondering whether to wake him. She feared a silent, cold morning if she didn't tea. Jim, she called softly. He stirred, barely awake. What do you want? To talk. No, I want to sleep. Okay, I'll get ready for bed. He started to rise, but she stopped him. Actually, I have a question. She stepped out in her nightgown, a deliberate choice to show she was still his. Okay, he said, his voice laced with suspicion. Did you sleep with him? No, Jim, it was just a date. I've never slept with anyone on a first date, you know that. Jim nodded, but his skepticism remained. Yeah, but now you're just looking for a lover, not a husband. I thought maybe things had changed. Are you seeing him again? We are going to the ballet on Sunday and having lunch, Jim scoffed. So this isn't supposed to affect us, but you are seeing him Friday night and Sunday afternoon, our usual time together. Interesting. Linda sighed, realizing he wasn't listening anymore. He lay down, turning his back to her. She finished getting ready for bed, hoping against hope that Jim would come to terms with their new reality. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Thrill. Linda couldn't shake the excitement from her evening with Mark. As she sipped her coffee the next morning, the memories replayed in her mind. The thrill of being desired, the electricity of his touch, it was intoxicating. But the reality of her marriage with Jim loomed over her like a storm cloud. Jim was distant, his expressions hard to read. He was up early as usual, preparing for a long day at the office. They exchanged a few words over breakfast, the silence between them growing thicker with each passing minute. Any plans for today? Linda asked, trying to bridge the gap. Just the usual, Jim replied curtly, his eyes fixed on the newspaper. Maybe we could have dinner together tonight. Just the two of us? She suggested, hoping for a positive response. Jim looked up, his gaze piercing. We'll see, he said, non-committal. Linda sighed inwardly, knowing that we'll see was Jim's way of saying no without confrontation. She watched him leave, a mixture of sadness and determination settling in her chest. She needed to keep her affair discreet and separate from her marriage, but she also longed for the passion she felt with Mark. As the week progressed, Linda and Mark continued to see each other. They met for lunch at a quaint bistro on Wednesday, their conversations flowing easily. Mark's charm and confidence were a stark contrast to the strained atmosphere at home. I feel like a teenager again, Linda confessed, as they walked through a nearby park after lunch. Is that a good thing? Mark asked, smiling. It's exhilarating, she admitted, but also a bit scary. Scary how? He probed gently. I don't want to lose what I have with Jim, but I can't deny how alive I feel with you. Mark stopped walking and turned to face her. Linda, I'm not asking you to choose. I understand your situation. Let's just enjoy what we have. His words were reassuring, but they also reminded Linda of the precarious balance she was trying to maintain. She nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. You are right. Let's just enjoy this. Their afternoon ended with a lingering kiss, and Linda returned home, her mind swirling with thoughts of Mark. She knew she was walking a fine line, but the forbidden thrill was too tempting to resist. On Friday night, Linda prepared for another evening with Mark. She chose a sleek black dress that accentuated her curves, adding a touch of red lipstick for a bold statement. As she glanced at her reflection, a pang of guilt tugged at her. She loved Jim, but she needed this excitement to feel alive. Heading out again? Jim's voice startled her. Linda turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Yes, just for a few hours. Jim nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Have fun. His tone was neutral, but Linda could sense the underlying tension. She gave him a tight smile and left, her heart heavy. The drive to Mark S. place was filled with conflicting emotions, anticipation mixed with guilt. Mark greeted her with a warm hug and a glass of wine. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes filled with admiration. "Thank you," Linda replied, taking a sip of the wine. "I needed this." They spent the evening at a jazz club, the music and ambiance providing the perfect backdrop for their growing connection. As the night wore on, Linda found herself opening up to Mark in ways she hadn't with Jim in years. They talked about their dreams, fears, and everything in between. "Do you ever regret getting married?" Mark asked, his voice low and serious. Linda paused, considering his question. "No, I don't regret it. I love Jim. But sometimes I wonder if we've lost our way." Mark nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's natural to have doubts. But you're here now, and that means something." Linda leaned in, her lips brushing against his. "Yes, it does." Their kiss deepened, and for a moment Linda forgot about everything else. She was lost in the sensation of being desired and cherished. But as they pulled away, reality came crashing back. "I should go," she whispered, her voice tinged with regret. Mark S. fingers traced the outline of her jaw. "I'll see you on Sunday?" Linda nodded, a bittersweet smile on her lips. "Yes, I'll see you then." The drive home was quiet, the thrill of the evening fading into a somber reflection. Linda knew she was playing with fire, but the passion she felt with Mark was something she couldn't easily give up. As she entered the house, she found Jim in the living room watching TV. He glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the screen. "Did you have a good time?" he asked, his tone casual. "Yes, it was nice," Linda replied, unsure of how much he really wanted to know. Jim nodded, his face expressionless. "Good night, Linda." "Good night, Jim," she said softly, heading upstairs. In the solitude of their bedroom, Linda changed into her pajamas and climbed into bed. She stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She needed to find a way to balance her desires with her responsibilities. The forbidden thrill of her affair with Mark was exhilarating, but the love she had for Jim was undeniable. As she drifted off to sleep, Linda couldn't help but wonder how long she could keep this up. The cracks in their golden marriage were growing wider, and it was only a matter of time before something had to give. Chapter 3. Secrets and Lies. Jim's suspicions gnawed at him like a relentless itch he couldn't scratch. The woman he had spent the last 20 years with was slipping away, and he felt powerless to stop it. Linda was careful, but Jim noticed the little things, the subtle shifts in her behavior, the way she smiled more often when she thought he wasn't looking, and the new habits she had picked up. Unable to shake the feeling that there was more to Linda's late nights and frequent outings, Jim decided to take action. He hired a private investigator named Sam, a recommendation from a trusted friend. Sam had a reputation for discretion and efficiency, qualities Jim valued highly. Meeting Sam in a dimly lit cafe, Jim felt a mix of apprehension and determination. He laid out his suspicions and provided Sam with all the information he could. Sam listened attentively, taking notes and asking pointed questions. "Leave it to me," Sam said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'll get to the bottom of this." Days turned into weeks, and Sam kept Jim updated with regular reports. Linda's movements were tracked, her meetings with Mark documented with meticulous detail. The evidence was irrefutable. Linda was deeply involved with Mark. Jim felt a surge of anger and betrayal as he reviewed the photos and notes. He had suspected it, but seeing the proof in black and white made it all too real. He struggled to maintain his composure, knowing that he needed a clear head to confront Linda. That evening, Linda returned home, her face glowing with the after-effects of her latest rendezvous with Mark. Jim watched her, his emotions a storm of conflicting feelings. "Hi, honey," Linda said, leaning in to kiss him. Jim turned away, his voice cold. "We need to talk." Linda froze, sensing the gravity in his tone. "What is it, Jim?" "Sit down," he instructed, gesturing to the couch. She complied, her eyes wide with concern. Jim took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "I know about Mark." Linda's heart pounded in her chest. What do you mean? I hired a private investigator, Jim said bluntly. I've seen the photos, I've read the reports, I know everything. Linda's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. How long has this been going on? Jim demanded. Linda's voice trembled as she replied, A few months. Jim's fists clenched. A few months? And you thought I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was that blind? Tears welled up in Linda's eyes. Jim, I am so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did, Jim snapped. You betrayed me, Linda. You lied to me, and for what? For some thrill with a younger man? Linda's tears flowed freely now. It is not just that, Jim. I felt alive with him. I felt wanted and desired in a way I haven't felt in years. Jim's anger flared. And you couldn't talk to me about it? You couldn't tell me how you were feeling? I didn't know how, Linda admitted, her voice breaking. I was scared you'd leave me. Jim laughed bitterly. Leave you? After 20 years you think I would leave you just like that? Linda looked down, her hands trembling. I was wrong. I see that now. Silence hung heavy in the room, the weight of their shattered trust palpable. Jim stood up, pacing the room. I don't know what to do, Linda. I don't know if I can forgive you for this. Linda's heart ached. Please, Jim. Give me a chance to make it right. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Jim stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression a mix of hurt and determination. I need time to think, to process this. But things can go on like this. Linda nodded, her tears still flowing. I understand. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Jim threw himself into his work, trying to find solace in the routine of his job. Linda, on the other hand, found herself increasingly isolated. She missed the easy companionship with Jim, the laughter and the shared dreams. But more than anything, she missed the sense of security and trust that had once defined their relationship. She tried to keep her distance from Mark, but the magnetic pull of their connection was hard to resist. They continued to meet, albeit less frequently and with a sense of growing caution. One afternoon, while sitting in her car outside Mark's condo, Linda received a text from him. Can we talk? It's important. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the message. She walked up to his door, her mind racing with possibilities. Mark greeted her with a strained smile, leading her inside. What is going on? Linda asked, sensing his unease. Mark took a deep breath. I can keep doing this, Linda. It's too much. The sneaking around, the lies. It's not fair to you and it's not fair to me. Linda felt a pang of panic. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to take a break, Mark said gently. You need to sort things out with Jim, and I need to figure out what I want. Tears welled up in Linda's eyes. But I don't want to lose you. Mark's expression softened. I care about you, Linda, but this isn't sustainable. We need to be honest with ourselves. Linda nodded, her heart heavy with resignation. You're right. I know you are right. They shared a tender, bittersweet kiss, knowing it might be their last. As Linda left Mark's condo, she felt a mix of sadness and relief. She knew she had to focus on her marriage and the possibility of rebuilding what she had shattered. Back at home, Linda found Jim in his office, staring at his computer screen. She knocked softly on the doorframe. Jim, can we talk? She asked, her voice tentative. He looked up, his eyes tired and filled with unresolved pain. Sure, come in. Linda sat down across from him, taking a deep breath. I've ended things with Mark. Jim's expression remained guarded. And what do you expect me to say to that? I don't know, Linda admitted. I just thought you should know. Jim nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. Linda reached out, her hand trembling. Jim, I want to make things right between us. I want to try and fix this if you'll let me. Jim's eyes softened, and for a moment, Linda saw a glimmer of hope. It's not going to be easy, Linda. Trust takes time to rebuild. I know, she whispered, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Jim leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. We'll see, Linda. We'll see. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and hard conversations. But for the first time in a long while, Linda felt a flicker of hope. She had a chance to rebuild her life with Jim, to restore the trust they had lost. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to try. As they sat in the quiet of Jim's office, the weight of their shared history hung between them. It was a fragile beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. And for that, Linda was grateful. Chapter 4. Turning the Tables. The tension in the house was palpable as Linda and Jim navigated their fragile truce. They both tiptoed around each other, careful not to ignite further conflict. The wounds were still fresh, and trust was a distant memory. Jim threw himself into his work, often staying late at the office to avoid the uncomfortable silence at home. Linda, meanwhile, tried to find solace in her routines, though everything felt hollow without the connection she once had with Jim. One evening, as Jim sat in his office, a soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see his assistant, Emma, standing in the doorway. She had been a pillar of support over the past few months, her efficiency and understanding helping him navigate the turmoil at home. "Jim, do you have a minute?" Emma asked, her voice gentle. "Sure, come in," Jim replied, setting aside his work. Emma closed the door behind her and took a seat across from him. "You've been working late a lot recently. Is everything okay?" Jim sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It is complicated, Emma. Things at home are difficult." Emma nodded, her eyes filled with concern. "If you ever need to talk, I am here." Jim offered a weak smile. "Thanks, Emma, that means a lot." Over the next few weeks, Jim and Emma's professional relationship began to blur. They spent more time together, sharing stories and confiding in each other. Emma's presence became a comforting constant in Jim's life, a stark contrast to the uncertainty he felt at home. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Jim and Emma decided to grab dinner at a nearby restaurant. The atmosphere was relaxed, and for the first time in weeks, Jim felt a semblance of normalcy. "Tell me about your family, Emma," Jim said, genuinely curious. Emma smiled, her eyes lighting up. "Well, I have a younger brother who is in college. My parents live in another state, but we stay in touch regularly. They are really supportive." Jim listened intently, appreciating the warmth in Emma's voice. "It sounds like you have a great support system." "I do," Emma replied, "and I want you to know that you have one too, Jim. I am here for you." Jim felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Emma. That means more than you know." As the evening progressed, their conversation flowed easily, and Jim found himself laughing more than he had in months. Emma's wit and kindness were a balm to his weary soul. After dinner, they walked back to the office to retrieve their cars. The night air was cool, and the city lights cast a gentle glow over the streets. "Emma, I just want to say, thank you. You've been amazing through all of this," Jim said, his voice earnest. Emma smiled softly. "I'm glad I could help, Jim. You're a good man. You deserve happiness." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world around them seemed to fade away. Jim felt an inexplicable pull towards Emma, a connection that went beyond friendship. He leaned in, his heart pounding, and kissed her. The kiss was tender and hesitant at first, but it quickly deepened, fueled by months of pent-up emotion. When they finally pulled away, both were breathless and a little dazed. "Jim, Emma began, but Jim placed a finger on her lips. "Let's not complicate things right now," he said softly. "We can talk about this later." Emma nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "Okay." They parted ways, each lost in their own thoughts. For Jim, the kiss was a turning point. He had been feeling lost and alone, but Emma's presence had reignited a spark within him. He knew he had to face the reality of his situation with Linda, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, Jim walked into his office with a renewed sense of purpose. He had a plan to confront Linda and address the issues that had been tearing them apart. He couldn't continue living in a state of limbo, and it was time to take control of his life. That evening, Jim returned home earlier than usual. Linda was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She looked up, surprised to see him. "You're home early," she said, her voice tentative. "Yes, I thought we should talk," Jim replied, his tone serious. Linda set down the knife she was using to chop vegetables and turned to face him. Okay, what about? About us. About where we go from here, Jim said, sitting down at the kitchen table. Linda joined him, her expression wary. I am listening. Jim took a deep breath. I know things have been difficult between us, and I haven't been completely honest with you. Linda's eyes widened. What do you mean? I have been seeing someone, Jim admitted, his voice steady. Emma, my assistant. It started as a friendship, but it has become more. Linda's heart sank. She had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed was a blow. I see. I am not saying this to hurt you, Jim continued. But we need to be honest with each other. Our marriage can't survive on lies and secrets. Linda nodded slowly. You're right. I've been trying to figure out how to fix things between us. But maybe we need to accept that we've both changed. Jim reached across the table, taking her hand. I still care about you, Linda. But we need to decide if we can rebuild what we had or if it's time to move on. Tears welled up in Linda's eyes. I don't want to lose you, Jim. But I also don't want us to be miserable. Jim squeezed her hand gently. Then let's take it one step at a time. We can try counseling, see if we can work through this. But we need to be honest about our feelings and what we want. Linda wiped away her tears. Okay, I'll do whatever it takes. Jim felt a sense of relief. It wouldn't be easy, but they were finally taking steps towards addressing their problems. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least they were facing it together. As they sat in the quiet of their kitchen, the weight of their shared history hung between them. It was a fragile beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless, and for that, they both felt a glimmer of hope. The days that followed were filled with challenging conversations and moments of introspection. Jim and Linda attended counseling sessions where they confronted their past mistakes and explored their desires for the future. It was a painful process, but it also brought them closer in unexpected ways. Jim continued to see Emma, but their relationship took on a different dynamic. They were open and honest about their feelings, acknowledging the complexities of their situation. Emma remained a source of support, but she also encouraged Jim to focus on healing his marriage. One evening, as Jim and Linda sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Jim reached for her hand. Do you think we can really do this, Linda? Linda squeezed his hand, a small smile on her lips. I think we can try, and sometimes that's enough. Jim nodded, feeling a sense of peace. It wouldn't be easy, but they were committed to finding a way forward. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat together, united in their determination to rebuild their lives. For the first time in a long while, Jim and Linda felt a sense of possibility. They had a long road ahead, but they were ready to face it together, and that was a start. Chapter 5. Confrontations. The air was thick with tension as Jim and Linda navigated their uncertain path forward. Counseling sessions brought up painful memories and raw emotions, leaving both of them drained yet hopeful. They were committed to rebuilding their relationship, but the process was slow and fraught with challenges. One evening, after a particularly intense counseling session, Linda decided to take a walk to clear her head. The autumn air was crisp, and the neighborhood was quiet. She wandered aimlessly, her thoughts a tangled mess of hope and despair. As she turned a corner, she was startled to see Mark standing by his car. His expression was a mix of surprise and concern. Linda, what are you doing out here? Linda felt a pang of guilt. I needed some air. It's been a rough day. Mark nodded, his eyes filled with sympathy. Do you want to talk about it? Linda hesitated but then nodded. Yeah, I think I do. They walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench, the silence between them comfortable. Linda recounted the latest developments in her marriage, the ups and downs of counseling, and her fears about the future. I know it sounds strange, but I feel like I am walking a tightrope, Linda admitted. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. Mark listened intently, his expression serious. You are incredibly brave, Linda. Facing these issues head-on takes a lot of strength. Linda smiled weakly. Thanks, Mark. That means a lot. Mark reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. You know, no matter what happens, I am here for you. Linda looked into his eyes, feeling a mix of gratitude and longing. I appreciate that, Mark. I really do. As they continued talking, Linda felt a sense of calm wash over her. Despite the complexity of her situation, having someone who understood her meant the world. They talked until the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park. Thank you for listening, Linda said as they stood to leave. Any time, Mark replied, giving her a warm hug. Take care of yourself, Linda. As Linda walked back home, she felt lighter. She knew she still had a long way to go, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Back at home, Jim was in the living room, reading a book. He looked up as Linda entered, a question in his eyes. Where have you been? He asked, his tone neutral. I went for a walk. I needed to clear my head, Linda replied honestly. Jim nodded. How are you feeling? Linda sat down next to him, taking a deep breath. Conflicted, but I think talking to someone helped. Jim's expression softened. I'm glad you have someone to talk to. Linda reached out, taking his hand. I want to be able to talk to you too, Jim. Jim squeezed her hand gently. We'll get there, Linda. It's just going to take time. The days that followed were a mix of progress and setbacks. Some days Jim and Linda felt closer than they had in years, sharing moments of genuine connection and understanding. Other days, old wounds resurfaced, and they found themselves back in familiar patterns of conflict. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Jim sat in his office, staring at a photo of him and Linda from their honeymoon. The smiles on their faces were genuine, filled with hope and promise. He felt a pang of longing for those simpler times. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Emma, looking concerned. Jim, are you okay? She asked, stepping into the room. Jim sighed, setting the photo down. Just thinking about the past. Emma sat down across from him, her expression empathetic. Do you want to talk about it? Jim shook his head. I don't know if talking about it will help. It just feels like everything is falling apart. Emma reached out, placing a hand on his arm. You're doing your best, Jim. That's all anyone can ask for. Jim looked at her, feeling a rush of gratitude. Thank you, Emma. You've been a great support through all of this. Emma smiled softly. I'm glad I could help. As they sat in the quiet of the office, Jim felt a sense of peace. He knew the road ahead was still uncertain, but he also knew he had people who cared about him and supported him. The next morning, Jim and Linda had their weekly counseling session. They talked about their progress, their fears, and their hopes for the future. The counselor, a patient and understanding woman named Dr. Stevens, guided them through the difficult conversations. Trust is built through consistent, honest communication, Dr. Stevens said. It won't happen overnight, but with effort from both of you, it can be rebuilt. Jim and Linda nodded, absorbing her words. That evening, as they sat on the porch, Jim turned to Linda. Do you think we can ever really get back to what we had? Linda thought for a moment before replying. I don't know if we'll ever be exactly the same, but maybe we can be something new, something better. Jim nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. I'd like that. Linda smiled, a sense of determination in her eyes. Me too. Just as they were about to head inside, Jim's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it and frowned. Everything okay? Linda asked, noticing his expression. It's Emma. She says she needs to talk to me about something urgent at the office, Jim replied, his brow furrowed. Linda's heart sank a little, but she tried to remain calm. Do you need to go in? Jim hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I think I should. Linda forced a smile. Okay, I'll see you when you get back. Jim kissed her on the cheek. I want to be long. As Jim drove to the office, his mind raced with possibilities. He hoped it was nothing serious, but Emma's message had sounded urgent. When he arrived, he found Emma waiting outside the building, her expression tense. What's going on, Emma? Jim asked, concerned. Emma took a deep breath. I didn't want to say this over the phone, but I think you need to know. There's been some talk among the staff about you and me. Rumors. Jim's heart sank. What kind of rumors? That we are more than just colleagues, that we've been having an affair, Emma said, her voice filled with worry. Jim felt a surge of anger. That's ridiculous. We've been nothing but professional. I know, Emma said quickly, but people talk, and it's starting to affect the office environment. Jim took a deep breath, trying to steady his emotions. Okay, we'll handle this. We'll address it directly and set the record straight. Emma nodded, relieved. Thank you, Jim. I just didn't want this to get out of hand. The next day, Jim called a staff meeting. He addressed the rumors head-on, making it clear that his relationship with Emma was strictly professional. He emphasized the importance of maintaining a respectful and focused work environment. After the meeting, Jim felt a sense of resolve. He couldn't control what people said, but he could control how he responded. He was determined to protect his reputation and his professional relationships. That evening, as he returned home, Linda greeted him with a warm smile. How did it go? Jim sighed, feeling the weight of the day lift slightly. It went well. We addressed the rumors, and hopefully that will put an end to them. Linda nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. I'm glad. I know this has been hard on you. Jim took her hand, feeling a surge of gratitude. Thank you for being so supportive. Linda squeezed his hand gently. We are in this together, Jim. We'll get through it. As they sat down to dinner, Jim felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew he wasn't alone. With Linda by his side and the support of those who cared about him, he felt ready to face whatever challenges came their way. For the first time in a long while, Jim and Linda felt a sense of unity. They were committed to rebuilding their relationship and facing the future together. It wouldn't be easy, but they were determined to make it work. As they sat together sharing a quiet meal, they felt a sense of hope. The past was behind them, and the future, though uncertain, held promise. They were ready to face it, hand in hand, one step at a time. Chapter 6. Unexpected Revelations. Jim and Linda's commitment to rebuilding their marriage was tested daily. The tension from the office rumors had subsided, but new challenges arose, threatening their fragile peace. Despite these obstacles, they pressed on, determined to find a way forward. One evening, after a long day at work, Jim and Linda sat in their living room, sipping tea and talking about their day. The conversation was light and easy, a stark contrast to the heavy discussions of recent months. How was your day? Linda asked, genuinely interested. It was good, Jim replied. Busy, but productive. How about yours? Linda smiled. It was nice. I went to lunch with Audrey. We talked about old times and laughed a lot. It felt good. Jim nodded, pleased to hear it. I am glad. You deserve to have some fun. As they sat together, enjoying the quiet moment, Jim's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it and frowned. It was Emma. What's wrong? Linda asked, noticing his expression. It's Emma. She says she needs to talk to me about something important, Jim replied, his brow furrowed. Linda's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stay calm. Do you need to go in? Jim shook his head. No. She says she can come here. Is that okay with you? Linda hesitated, but then nodded. Of course. A short while later, Emma arrived. She looked nervous, her usual composure shaken. Jim and Linda invited her to sit with them in the living room. What's going on, Emma? Jim asked, concerned. Emma took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. I have something to tell you both. It's not easy, but you need to know. Linda and Jim exchanged worried glances. Go on, Linda said gently. Emma swallowed hard, her eyes meeting Jim's I am pregnant. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. Jim felt his heart drop, his mind racing. Are you sure? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Yes, I am sure. Linda sat back, stunned. How? When did this happen? Emma looked down, her voice trembling. It happened a couple of months ago. I didn't know how to tell you, Jim. I didn't want to complicate things even more. Jim felt a surge of conflicting emotions, shock, guilt, fear. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was scared, Emma admitted. I didn't want to lose my job, and I didn't want to ruin your marriage. Linda took a deep breath, her mind whirling. Emma, does anyone else know about this? Emma shook her head. No, I haven't told anyone else. I thought it was best to keep it quiet until I knew what to do. Jim leaned forward, his face serious. We need to figure this out, together. Linda nodded, her expression resolute. Yes, we do. Emma wiped away her tears, grateful for their support. Thank you. I know this is a lot to take in. Jim felt a surge of protectiveness towards Emma. We'll handle this, Emma. You're not alone. As they sat together discussing their options, the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on all of them. They knew their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. Over the next few days, Jim and Linda grappled with the implications of Emma's pregnancy. They sought counsel from Dr. Stevens, who helped them navigate the emotional minefield they found themselves in. You need to be honest with each other about your feelings and concerns, Dr. Stevens advised. This situation is complex, but with open communication, you can find a way forward. Jim and Linda took her words to heart. They spent hours talking about their fears, hopes, and the future. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they were committed to facing it together. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Jim turned to Linda, his expression serious. What do you think we should do? Linda sighed, her eyes reflecting her inner turmoil. I don't know, Jim. This is so complicated, but I do know that we need to support Emma. She's going through this alone and she needs us. Jim nodded, his heart heavy. I agree. But what about us? Our marriage. Linda looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. We need to stay strong, Jim. We've come this far and we can't let this tear us apart. Jim felt a surge of gratitude for Linda's strength. You are right. We'll get through this. Together. As they held each other, they felt a sense of resolve. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it, one step at a time. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Jim and Linda met with Emma regularly, discussing plans and exploring options. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were determined to navigate it together. One afternoon, as they sat in a cafe discussing their next steps, Linda looked at Emma, her expression thoughtful. Have you thought about what you want to do, Emma? Emma nodded slowly. I've decided to keep the baby. I know it won't be easy, but I want to give my child a chance. Jim felt a swell of admiration for Emma's courage. We'll support you, Emma. Whatever you need. Linda reached out, taking Emma's hand. You're not alone in this. We'll be here for you every step of the way. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, I don't know what I would do without you both. As they sat together, united in their resolve, they felt a sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it, together. The next few months were a time of adjustment and growth. Jim and Linda continued their counseling sessions, working through their issues and building a stronger foundation for their marriage. Emma prepared for the arrival of her baby, with Jim and Linda by her side every step of the way. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Jim turned to Linda, his expression thoughtful. Do you think we are ready for this? Linda smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. I think we are as ready as we'll ever be. Jim nodded, feeling a sense of peace. We'll get through this, Linda, together. Linda squeezed his hand, her heart filled with hope. Yes, we will. As they sat together, united in their resolve, they felt a sense of hope. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it, together. For the first time in a long while, Jim and Linda felt a sense of unity and purpose. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they were committed to facing it together, one step at a time. As they held each other, they felt a sense of hope and determination. The past was behind them, and the future, though uncertain, held promise. They were ready to face it, hand in hand, one step at a time. Chapter 7. A New Path. The revelation of Emma's pregnancy had rocked Jim and Linda's world, but it also brought a sense of clarity. They knew what they had to do face this new challenge together. The days turned into weeks, and they settled into a routine that included regular check-ins with Emma, counseling sessions, and honest conversations about their future. One sunny Saturday morning, Jim and Linda decided to take a drive to clear their heads and spend some quality time together. They ended up at a picturesque lake a few hours from their home. The serene landscape, with its calm waters and gentle breeze, provided the perfect backdrop for some much-needed reflection. As they walked along the shore, Jim glanced at Linda. "Do you ever think about what our lives will look like in a year?" Linda nodded, her eyes on the water. "All the time. It's hard to imagine, but I try to stay positive." Jim took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I am glad we are doing this together. I don't think I could handle it alone." Linda smiled, squeezing his hand back. "Neither could I. We've come so far, Jim. I groy." They found a bench overlooking the lake and sat down, enjoying the tranquility. For a moment, they simply existed together, taking in the beauty around them. "I've been thinking," Linda began, breaking the silence. "Maybe we should start fresh, move somewhere new. A change of scenery might do us good." Jim looked at her, considering the idea. "You mean leave everything behind?" "Not everything," Linda clarified, "but maybe a new house, a new neighborhood. It could be a way to start over without the shadows of the past hanging over us." Jim nodded slowly. "It's worth thinking about. A new beginning." As they sat there, they talked about the possibilities, a new home, new routines, and the chance to build a future without the constant reminders of their past mistakes. The idea was both exciting and daunting, but it gave them something to look forward to. Back at home, they discussed their plans with Emma, who was supportive of the idea. She appreciated their efforts to create a positive environment for her and the baby. One evening, as they sat around the dining table, Jim brought up the topic again. "I've been looking at some potential houses. There are a few that might be perfect for us." Linda leaned in, eager to see. "Show me." Jim pulled out his laptop and opened a real estate website. They browsed through listings, discussing the pros and cons of each property. It was a welcome distraction from the stress they had been under, and it gave them a sense of purpose. After a few weeks of searching, they found a house that felt right. It was a charming two-story home in a quiet neighborhood, with enough space for Emma and the baby to feel comfortable. They decided to put in an offer, and to their delight, it was accepted. Moving day was a whirlwind of activity. Friends and family came to help, and by the end of the day, they were settled into their new home. As they unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, they felt a sense of hope and possibility. That evening, they sat on the porch, sipping wine and watching the stars come out. Jim turned to Linda, his expression content. "This feels good, like a fresh start." Linda nodded, her eyes shining. "It does. I'm excited for what is to come." Jim leaned in, kissing her softly. "Me too." As they embraced, they felt a sense of peace. The future was still uncertain, but they were ready to face it together. In the weeks that followed, they settled into their new home. Emma's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and she often joined Jim and Linda for dinners and movie nights. They became a close-knit unit, supporting each other through the ups and downs. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room discussing baby names, Emma looked at Jim and Linda with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. I couldn't have gotten through this without you." Linda smiled warmly. "We are a family, Emma. We take care of each other." Jim nodded in agreement. "You are not alone in this. We are here for you, every step of the way." As the months passed, they prepared for the arrival of the baby. They decorated the nursery, attended prenatal classes, and planned for the future. The house was filled with laughter and anticipation, a stark contrast to the tension and uncertainty of the past. One evening, as they sat around the dining table, Jim raised his glass in a toast, to new beginnings and to family. "We've come a long way, and I'm grateful for each of you." Linda and Emma raised their glasses, smiles on their faces. "To family," they echoed. As they clinked glasses, they felt a sense of unity and hope. The future was bright, and they were ready to face it together. The day finally arrived when Emma went into labor. Jim and Linda rushed her to the hospital, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Hours later, they welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world. As they stood together, gazing at the newborn in Emma's arms, they felt a sense of awe and joy. This tiny life represented a new beginning, a symbol of hope and love. Jim looked at Linda, his eyes filled with emotion. "We did it. We are a family." Linda smiled, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Yes, we are." Emma looked up, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, both of you. I couldn't have done this without you." As they embraced, they felt a sense of completion. The past was behind them, and the future was filled with promise. They were ready to face it, hand in hand, one step at a time. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and joyful moments. Jim and Linda adjusted to their new roles, finding a rhythm that worked for them. They shared the responsibilities of caring for the baby, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jim turned to Linda, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think we've finally found our new path?" Linda smiled, her eyes filled with love. "I think we have, and it feels right." Jim nodded, feeling a sense of peace. "I am grateful for every moment, for this second chance." Linda leaned in, kissing him softly. "Me too, Jim. Me too." As they held each other, they felt a sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led them to a place of love and unity. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. For the first time in a long while, Jim and Linda felt a sense of contentment. They had found their new path, and it was filled with hope and possibility. They were ready to face the future, hand in hand, one step at a time. Chapter 8. Final Showdown. Jim and Linda had found a new sense of stability in their lives, but they knew that the journey wasn't over. There were still unresolved issues and lingering doubts that needed to be addressed. They continued to work on their relationship, attending counseling sessions and communicating openly, but the past had a way of creeping back in. One evening, as they sat in their living room, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Jim opened the door to find Mark standing there, his expression tense. "Mark, what are you doing here?" Jim asked, his voice guarded. Mark glanced past Jim, his eyes landing on Linda. "I need to talk to both of you. It's important." Jim stepped aside, allowing Mark to enter. Linda's heart raced as she saw him. She hadn't spoken to Mark since their last encounter, and his sudden appearance filled her with unease. They all sat down, the atmosphere thick with tension. Mark took a deep breath, his eyes meeting Linda's. "Linda, I didn't come here to cause trouble, but there's something you need to know." Linda's stomach churned. "What is it, Mark?" Mark hesitated before speaking. "I've been doing some thinking about everything that happened between us and about the baby. I realized I need to take responsibility for my actions." Jim's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" "I want to be part of my child's life," Mark said firmly. "I know it is complicated, but I believe it is the right thing to do." Linda felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She had never expected Mark to step up in this way. "Are you sure about this, Mark?" Mark nodded. "Yes, I am. I want to be there for my child, to support you and the baby in any way I can." Jim and Linda exchanged glances. This was a new twist they hadn't anticipated. They had just begun to find their footing, and now this new complication threatened to disrupt everything. Jim took a deep breath, his voice steady. "Mark, this isn't just about you. It is about all of us. We need to figure out how to navigate this together." Mark nodded, his expression sincere. "I understand that. I am willing to work with you both to find a solution." Linda looked at Jim, her heart aching with the weight of the situation. "Jim, what do you think?" Jim sighed, his mind racing. He knew this was a delicate situation, but he also knew they couldn't ignore it. "We need to talk to Emma about this. She is the mother, and her feelings and decisions are crucial." Linda agreed. "You are right. We'll talk to Emma and figure out the best way forward." The next day they sat down with Emma, explaining Mark's desire to be involved in the baby's life. Emma listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. "Emma, what do you think?" Jim asked gently. Emma took a deep breath. "I think it's important for the baby to have both parents involved, but we need to set clear boundaries and make sure it's in the best interest of the child." Jim and Linda nodded in agreement. They spent the next few hours discussing logistics, legalities, and how to co-parent effectively. It was a difficult conversation, filled with emotions, but they all knew it was necessary. As the weeks passed, they began to navigate their new reality. Mark was involved in the baby's life, attending Dr. S appointments and helping with preparations. It was an adjustment for everyone, but they worked together, putting the baby's needs first. One evening, as Jim and Linda sat on the porch, Jim turned to her, his expression serious. "Are you okay with all of this?" Linda sighed, her eyes reflecting her inner turmoil. "It's not easy, Jim, but I think it is the right thing to do. For the baby." Jim nodded, taking her hand. "We'll get through this, Linda. Together." Linda smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. "Yes, we will." As they sat together, they felt a sense of unity and determination. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were ready to face it hand in hand. One afternoon, as they were preparing for the baby's arrival, there was a knock on the door. Linda opened it to find Audrey standing there, her expression troubled. "Audrey? What is wrong?" Linda asked, concerned. Audrey took a deep breath, her eyes filled with worry. "Linda, I need to talk to you about something important. It is about Jim." Linda's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, Audrey?" Audrey hesitated before speaking. "I've heard some things about Jim and Emma. People are talking, and I think you need to know." Linda's mind raced. What are they saying? They were saying that Jim and Emma are more than just colleagues, that there is something going on between them, Audrey said, her voice gentle. Linda felt a surge of anger and hurt. She had worked so hard to rebuild her trust in Jim, and now this. "Are you sure about this, Audrey?" Audrey nodded. "I'm sorry, Linda. I thought you should know." Linda thanked Audrey and closed the door, her mind reeling. She needed to talk to Jim to find out the truth. That evening, as Jim walked in the door, Linda confronted him. "Jim, we need to talk, now." Jim's expression turned serious. "What is it, Linda?" Linda took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I heard some things today. About you and Emma. People are saying there's something going on between you two." Jim's eyes widened in shock. "Linda, that's not true. Emma and I are just friends. We've been through a lot together, but there's nothing more to it." Linda felt a mixture of relief and doubt. "Are you sure, Jim? I need to know the truth." Jim stepped closer, his voice earnest. "I swear, Linda, there's nothing going on between us. I love you and I am committed to our marriage." Linda searched his eyes, looking for any sign of deception. She saw only sincerity and love. "Okay, Jim, I believe you." Jim took her hand, his eyes filled with relief. "Thank you, Linda. I promise you, there's nothing to worry about." As they embraced, Linda felt a sense of peace. She knew they still had a long way to go, but she was willing to trust Jim and move forward. The days turned into weeks, and they continued to prepare for the baby's arrival. They attended prenatal classes, set up the nursery, and talked about their hopes and dreams for the future. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Jim turned to Linda, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think we are ready for this?" Linda smiled, her eyes filled with love. "I think we are as ready as we'll ever be." Jim nodded, feeling a sense of peace. "We'll get through this, Linda, together." As they held each other, they felt a sense of fulfillment. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led them to a place of love and unity. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. For the first time in a long while, Jim and Linda felt a sense of contentment. They had found their new path, and it was filled with hope and possibility. They were ready to face the future, hand in hand, one step at a time. Chapter 9. Closure and New Beginnings. The arrival of Emma's baby brought a whirlwind of emotions and changes to everyone's lives. Jim and Linda found themselves busier than ever, but they embraced the chaos with open hearts. They were determined to make this new chapter in their lives as positive and loving as possible. One crisp autumn morning, Jim and Linda were preparing for a small gathering to celebrate the baby's first month. Close friends and family were invited, and the house buzzed with anticipation. "Do you think we have everything ready?" Linda asked, adjusting a bouquet of flowers on the dining table. Jim looked around, smiling. "I think so. The place looks great, and the food smells amazing. You did a fantastic job." Linda blushed slightly. "We did a fantastic job. I couldn't have done it without you." Jim kissed her on the forehead. Team effort. Guests began to arrive, filling the house with laughter and warmth. Emma, holding her newborn daughter, was the center of attention. She beamed with pride as friends and family admired the baby. Linda watched Emma from across the room, feeling a mixture of pride and nostalgia. She remembered the early days of her own motherhood and the overwhelming love she felt for her children. As the party progressed, Linda found herself talking to Mark. They had managed to find a balance in their co-parenting arrangement, and their interactions were civil, even friendly. "She looks just like you," Mark said, glancing at Emma and the baby. Linda smiled. "Yes, she does. She's beautiful." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I'm glad we've been able to make this work for her sake." Linda agreed. "Me too. It wasn't easy, but I think we are doing the right thing." Jim joined them, his expression warm. "Everything okay here?" Linda nodded. "Yes, just talking about the baby." Mark smiled. "She's a lucky girl to have so many people who love her." Jim clapped Mark on the shoulder. "She certainly is." As the party wound down, Jim and Linda found themselves alone on the porch, watching the sunset. The quiet moment was a stark contrast to the lively gathering inside. "You know," Jim began, his voice soft, "I never imagined we'd end up here, but I'm grateful for everything we've been through. It's made us stronger." Linda leaned her head on his shoulder. "I feel the same way. We've come a long way, Jim, and I am proud of us." Jim kissed her gently. "I love you, Linda, more than ever." "I love you too, Jim," Linda replied, her heart full. As they sat together, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the landscape. They felt a deep sense of peace and contentment, knowing they had overcome so much and were stronger for it. The next day, Jim and Linda decided to take a drive to visit an old friend, Mrs. Porter, who had moved to a quaint country home a few years back. Mrs. Porter had been a mentor and a source of wisdom for Linda, and she often thought of her during challenging times. When they arrived, Mrs. Porter greeted them warmly. "Jim, Linda, it's so good to see you." "It's good to see you too, Mrs. Porter," Linda said, hugging the older woman. Mrs. Porter led them into her cozy living room, where a fire crackled in the fireplace. "How have you two been?" Jim smiled. "We've been good. Busy, but good." Linda nodded. "Yes, very busy, but we've found our rhythm." Mrs. Porter's eyes twinkled. "I'm glad to hear that. You two have always been fighters. I knew you'd come through." They spent the afternoon talking and reminiscing about old times. Mrs. Porter shared stories of her own challenges and triumphs, providing wisdom and perspective that Jim and Linda deeply appreciated. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Porter took Linda's hands in hers. "Remember, my dear, it's the love and effort you put into your relationship that makes it strong. Never forget that." Linda nodded, her eyes misty. "Thank you, Mrs. Porter. I want to forget." Back at home, Jim and Linda felt a renewed sense of purpose. They knew that their journey was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next, together. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Jim turned to Linda, his expression serious. "There's something I've been thinking about." "What is it?" Linda asked, curious. "I think we should renew our vows," Jim said, his eyes filled with love. "We've been through so much, and I want to reaffirm my commitment to you." Linda's heart swelled with emotion. "I would love that, Jim. It would mean so much to me." They began planning a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family. It was a chance to celebrate their love and the journey they had been on. The day of the vow renewal was perfect. The weather was clear, and the backyard was beautifully decorated with flowers and fairy lights. Emma, Mark, and the baby were there, along with other close friends and family. As Jim and Linda stood before their loved ones, they exchanged vows, their voices filled with emotion. They promised to continue supporting each other, to love and cherish each other through all of life's challenges. After the ceremony, they celebrated with a feast, laughter, and dancing. It was a day filled with joy and love, a testament to the strength of their relationship. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Linda turned to Jim. "Thank you for today. It was perfect." Jim smiled, pulling her close. "It was perfect because you were by my side." As they held each other, they felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had come a long way, and their love had only grown stronger. The future was still uncertain, but they were ready to face it together, hand in hand. For the first time in a long while, Jim and Linda felt complete. They had found their way back to each other, and their love had been renewed. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together, one step at a time. Thank you for listening to this story. Subscribe to my channel, put a like under the video, and write a comment about how you like this story and what stories you want to hear.